The 8,152nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. As this is the first formal meeting of the Security Council this year, I should like to extend my warm wishes on the occasion of the New Year to all members of the Security Council, the United Nations, and the Secretariat. In presiding over this first formal meeting of the Council in 2018, I'm happy to welcome the new members, Côte d'Ivoire, Equatorial Guinea, Kuwait, the Netherlands, Peru, and Poland. We look forward to their participation in the work of the Council. Their experience and wisdom will be of invaluable assistance in the discharge of the Council's responsibilities. I shall also take this opportunity to express the Council's gratitude to the outgoing members, namely Egypt, Italy, Japan, Senegal, Ukraine, and Uruguay, for their important contributions to the work of the Council during their terms. I should also like to take this opportunity to pay tribute on behalf of the Council to His Excellency Mr. Koro Besho, Permanent Representative of Japan, for his service as President of the Council for the month of December 2017. I'm sure I speak for all members of the Council in expressing deep appreciation to Ambassador Besho and his team for the great diplomatic skill with which they conducted the Council's business last month. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. In accordance with the Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Tabruk Zerihun, Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, to participate in the meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I give the floor to Mr. Tabruk Zerihun.
Thank you, Mr. President. As requested, I would like to brief the Security Council on ongoing developments in the Islamic Republic of Iran under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East. As this is the first public meeting of the Security Council in 2018, I would like, on behalf of the Department of Political Affairs, to congratulate the 6 new elected members of the Council on the assumption of their important responsibilities. I also wish the Security Council a successful year. Mr. President, the protests in the Islamic Republic of Iran started on 28 December 2017, when hundreds of Iranians gathered in a largely peaceful manner in Mashhad, the country's second largest city, chanting slogans against economic hardship. Over the following days, protests occurred in other cities, other urban areas, including Tehran, as well as in many rural areas. Some of the slogans also expressed disappointment at slow or limited change in social strictures and political freedoms, and criticized what the demonstrators decried as the privileged position of the clergy and elements of the country's security establishment. In other cases, demonstrators demanded that Iran cease costly involvement in the region. As the protests escalated, some turned violent. Videos posted on social media platforms, several of which remain largely blocked by the government, and footage broadcast by state TV channels showed the beating of protesters, as well as the burning of government offices, banks, and religious centers. according to reports carried by official Iranian media, more than 20 Iranians, including a teenage boy and a policeman, have died during the protests. Iran's Ministry of Interior stated that over 1,000 protesters have been detained, although many may have since been released. With very limited presence on the ground, the Secretariat cannot confirm or deny the authenticity of the images that have been broadcast or the extent of the violence. However, we have received reports that the police, rather than the military forces, were responding to the protests. On the 3rd of January, Iran's Revolutionary Guards announced the end of anti-government protests. Recent reports indicate smaller and scattered demonstrations. Meanwhile, from the 3rd to the 5th of January, large pro-government rallies were reportedly held across the country, with participants expressing support for the Supreme Leader and condemning violence. Mr. President, members of the Security Council, on the 31st of December 2017, President Rouhani told a cabinet meeting that the Iranian people should be allowed space to protest and criticize their government. At the same time, he stressed that violence will not be tolerated. 2 days later, on the 2nd of January, the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei accused Iran's enemies, without naming them, of stirring the unrest. On the 3rd of January, the permanent representative of Iran to the United Nations wrote to the Secretary General accusing the United States of stepping up, and I quote, its acts of intervention in a grotesque way in Iran's internal affairs under the pretext of providing support for sporadic protests in Iran. End of quote. Mr. President, the outbreak of violence, protests in Iran has focused the attention to events in the country. A number of world leaders have expressed support for the Iranian protesters. Others, including the European Union, have called on the Iranian authorities to respect the right to peaceful demonstration and freedom of opinion. Yet, more have supported the government of Iran, calling the protests an internal matter. On the 3rd of January, the Secretary General issued a statement deploring the loss of life in the protests and urging respect for the right to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression, and that demonstrations take place in a peaceful manner. Same day, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights called on the Iranian authorities, and I quote, to handle the wave of protests that have taken place around the country with great care so as not to further inflame violence and unrest, and to investigate all deaths and serious injuries that have occurred so far. End of quote. On the 5th of January, 4 United Nations Special Rapporteurs stated that, and I quote, the Iranian authorities should take immediate action to ensure that all citizens can exercise peacefully the right to freedom of expression and assembly, and should ensure that these and other fundamental rights are not met with violence. End of quote. Mr. President, members of the Council, as of today, United Nations development work in the Islamic Republic of Iran has not been significantly affected by the recent events. The Secretariat will continue to monitor developments on the ground and engage Iranian authorities with a view to contributing to efforts that address, as the Secretary General underscored in his statement on 3rd of January, the legitimate concerns of the population through peaceful means, and help to avoid violence or retribution against peaceful protesters. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Zerihun for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Happy New Year to all of the members of the Security Council and the General Assembly. In the past week, what has happened on the ground throughout the nation of Iran is something the world must take note of. It is a spontaneous expression of fundamental human rights. The Iranian people are rising up in over 79 locations throughout the country. It is a powerful exhibition of brave people who have become so fed up with their oppressive government that they're willing to risk their lives in protest. The world should applaud their courage. The voices of the Iranian people should be heard. We have debated the proper role of human rights in the Security Council. Some of our colleagues believe that human rights have no place here. They believe human rights and fundamental freedoms are the business only of the governments that control them. The United States does not share that belief. Human rights are not the gift of governments. They are the inalienable right of the people themselves. Freedom and human dignity cannot be separated from peace and security. When the rights of the people are denied, the people rightly resist. If the concerns are not acknowledged, then peace and security are inevitably threatened. We have seen that repeatedly throughout human history. The case of Syria provides a horrible recent testament to this fact. And what is happening in the towns and cities across Iran right now bears out this fundamental truth. The Iranian regime's contempt for the rights of its people has been widely documented for many years. The people of Iran have finally had enough, and they are showing it by taking to the streets. The Iranian people understand the nature of their regime. They understand that their lack of voice in their government has allowed the regime to ignore them, and it has allowed the regime to spread conflict and instability far and wide. If you listen to the slogans they chant in the street, this understanding comes through loud and clear. The United Nations reports that the Iranian regime spends at least $6 billion every year propping up the murderous Assad regime in Syria. The people of Iran know this, and so they are telling the government, quote, "Let go of Syria, think of us." The Iranian regime spends millions on militias in Iraq each year. It gives millions more each year to the Houthi rebels in Yemen, including sending them ballistic missiles to fire at other countries. Meanwhile, the average Iranian family is 15% poorer today than it was 10 years ago. So the Iranian people demand, think of us. The regime gives low-interest loans to the elite and well-connected. It rewards construction contracts to corrupt Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps affiliated firms. They construct buildings that skimp on safety. Thousands of these buildings collapsed during an earthquake. Hundreds died. And the Iranian people chant, think of us. Today, the people of Iran are speaking to their government, and their message is undeniable. Stop the support for terrorism. Stop giving billions of our money to killers and dictators. Stop taking our wealth and spending it on foreign fighters and proxy wars. Think of us. Freedom-loving nations worldwide have spread support for the cause of the Iranian people. Canada, Norway, the United Kingdom, Israel, France, Sweden, the European Union. We honor and appreciate all of these statements of support for universal human rights. But we must do more. The Iranian regime is cutting off internet access in an attempt to shut down communication among the protesters. They are attempting to silence the voice of the Iranian people. We cannot allow that to happen. Every UN member state is sovereign, but member states cannot use sovereignty as a shield when they categorically deny their people human rights and fundamental freedoms. I call on all of my colleagues to join me in amplifying the message of the Iranian people. And I call on the government of Iran to stop censoring the voice of the people and to restore the access to the internet. Because in the end, the Iranian people will determine their own destiny. And let there be no doubt whatsoever, The United States stands unapologetically with those in Iran who seek freedom for themselves, prosperity for their families, and dignity for their nation. We will not be quiet. No dishonest attempt to call the protesters puppets of foreign powers will change that. The Iranian people know the truth, and we know the truth. They are acting of their own will, on their own behalf, for their own future. Nothing will stop Americans from standing in solidarity with them. In 2009, the world stood by passively while the hopes of the Iranian people were crushed by their government. In 2018, we will not be silent. Once again, the people of Iran are rising up. They are asking for something that no government can legitimately deny them: their human rights and fundamental freedoms. They are calling out, "Think of us." If the founding principles of this institution mean anything, we will not only hear their cry, we will finally answer it. The Iranian regime is now on notice. The world will be watching what you do. Thank you.
I thank Representative of the United States for her statement. I now give the floor to Representative of France.
Monsieur le
President, I thank Assistant Secretary General Tayyip Zerihoun for the very specific briefing elements that he shared with us on recent events in Iran. We are keeping a close eye on the situation on the ground, and I would like, on behalf of France, to share with you two main messages this afternoon. Firstly, we have met together this afternoon on the situation in the Middle East, and more specifically on the question of Iran. As everyone knows, within the Security Council, there are several agenda items that allow us to discuss and deal with the various matters relating to international peace and security in the Middle East region, whether that be the implementation of Resolution 2231 or discussions and actions pertaining to Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, or Iraq. In this context, our role, indeed our responsibility, is to do all that we can to find a solution to the flashpoints and the crises in the Middle East. And it is in that understanding, President, that we must commit to fully upholding the nuclear agreement with Iran, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, and we must also commit to fully promoting its implementation to the letter. This was the approach that enjoyed consensus during the Council's meeting on the 19th of December last year. Said nuclear agreement with Iran concerns each and every one of us, and the matter at hand is to ensure that it is rigorously implemented. The agreement is one of the cornerstones of stability of the region of the Middle East as a whole. To lose this hard-won ground, to wit the agreement, would be a major setback not just for the region, but also for the entire international community and for the non-proliferation regime, and the consequences and fallout might be very heavy. We must also pursue a realistic and robust dialogue with Iran to regulate its ballistic activity and restrict it in order to ensure that it doesn't pose a risk of further stoking regional instability. We must, moreover, engage in frank and open discussions with Iran so that together with Tehran, we can address the concerns pertaining to Iran's influence over the Middle East and its role in regional crises, more specifically Iran's actions in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. In each of the aforementioned countries, we need to find the ways and means that will allow us to respond to attempts at external meddling. And preventing said external meddling is how we can gauge our attempts at stabilizing said countries. Stability in said countries will stand or fall by preventing said external meddling. This is the only way in which we shall achieve peace and be able to find inclusive political solutions to the conflicts that have buffeted the Middle East over the last few years. Despite our sometimes deep divisions, this dialogue is essential for all of us. Each and every one of us needs to engage in this dialogue, and France intends to engage in this dialogue going forward and not to walk away from it. We will go into it open-eyed and pursue said engagement and dialogue with Iran soberly and honestly. My second point concerns the specific issue that has brought the Council together today. I would like, firstly, to express my alarm in light of the violence with which the recent protests in Iran were met, as well as the number of victims of said violence and the arrests as suffered by the protesters. We call upon the Iranian authorities to exercise restraint and calm. It is essential that fundamental freedoms, such as the freedoms of belief and conscience, freedom of expression, freedom of communication, and the right to peacefully protest, are fully upheld and respected. Iranians should be able to peacefully protest and have their voices and views openly heard. We must be watchful in order to ensure that Iranians' rights and freedoms are not flouted. And this is what President Macron said to his Iranian counterpart, Hassan Rouhani, during their conversation on the 2nd of January. President, it is up to the Iranians and to the Iranians alone to pursue the path of peaceful dialogue, a dialogue based on full respect for the fundamental rights and freedoms of the Iranian people. However worrying the events of the last few days in Iran may be, they do not constitute per se a threat to international peace and security. We must react appropriately to what has been going on. In other words, we must ensure that we remain watchful and that we give proper vigilance to what is happening and to these peaceful protests, and particularly given the risk of violence in response to the protesters. But we must be wary of any attempt to exploit this crisis for personal ends, which would have the diametrically opposed outcome to that which is wished. To conclude, President, change in Iran will not come from without. It will come from the Iranian people themselves. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Bolivia.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, President. First and foremost, given that this is the first open meeting of the Security Council of this month, and indeed of this year, I would like to once again congratulate the Kazakh delegation on behalf of the delegation of the plurinational state of Bolivia. We congratulate you on taking up the reins of the presidency for this month, and we'd like to reassure you of my delegation's full support. President, the Bolivian delegation believes that the holding of this meeting this afternoon is not a good sign. It's not a welcome initiative, and I make that point in the understanding that, as has been the case in the past, we are witnessing a blatant attempt by some missions to bring to the attention of the Security Council issues that do not fall within the purview of this body. We categorically reject the undisguised attempt by some delegations to push for meetings on issues that do not represent threats to international peace and security. In so doing, they run the risk of the Security Council turning into a political tool to be exploited to each member's ends. It needs to be abundantly and crystal clear to the international community that the situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran is not an issue that belongs on the agenda of the Security Council. And we are concerned to see that there are clumsy attempts to force its inclusion on the Security Council agenda as part of the broader Middle East agenda item. President, the position of the plurinational state of Bolivia was made abundantly clear by President Evo Morales, who condemned in the strongest possible terms any threat to interfere in or meddle in the internal affairs that would be an affront to the rights and dignity of the people and government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We are convinced that, as history has proven time and again, unilateral action, political interventionism, and regime change only ever lead to devastating humanitarian, social, and economic consequences. And we are seeing the repercussions of that still today, including in countries which are before the Security Council. On this particular occasion, we echo what has been said repeatedly in the past by the non-aligned movement, which has time and again reiterated its commitment to respecting the sovereignty, the national unity, and the territorial integrity of states, as well as to upholding the sovereign equality of states, calling for the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of state, as well as the NAM's position on the peaceful solution of disputes and abstaining from the use or threat of use of force. Finally, as a state, Bolivia is convinced that any internal conflict of whichever state or any state around the world must be resolved in the framework of that country's own practices and in line with its own sovereign principles without any external meddling or interference. Thank you very much, President.
I thank the representative of Bolivia for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Kuwait.
شكرا سيد الرئيس يطيب لي وأنا أتحدث للمرة الأولى.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great pleasure for me, as I speak for the first time in the Security Council, to wish you a Happy New Year and to congratulate you on your presidency of the Council in January. I wish you every success. I would also like to congratulate to the newly elected members of the Council. I wish them every success in the upcoming years. Now, I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate that we hope to work together and cooperate with you on all issues on the agenda of the Council. The state of Kuwait will work hard in compliance with the principles and purposes of the UN Charter to achieve the aspirations of our peoples and the entire world. We listened carefully to the statement by ASG Taibrook Serihoun, and we appreciate the information he's provided to us and his efforts, as well as the work of the staff members of the Political Affairs Department. We took note of the letter of the 3rd of January of 2018 of the permanent representative of Iran to the Secretary General of the United Nations, as well as the press statement made by the Secretary General on the 3rd of January, in which he expressed his concerns regarding the loss of lives due to the demonstrations in Iran. We have been following the events, and we regret the loss of life among civilians and members of the security forces, as well as the various acts of violence that have occurred in Iran over the past few days. We insist that it's important to respect the right of expression and the rights of peaceful demonstrators in accordance with their constitution and the International Covenant on Political and Civil Rights of 1966 that guarantees a freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. It's important to respect these rights. The state of Kuwait considers that it's important to engage in preventive diplomacy and strengthen the role of the Security Council in order to prevent conflicts and to nip crises in the bud before they degenerate. Of course, on the basis of the principles defined that regulate relations between states and that are founded on the Charter of the United Nations, that is the sovereignty, the non-interference in internal affairs, and the compliance with the remit of the various bodies of the United Nations. The Council, according to Article 24, is the body that is in charge of preserving international security and to dealing with all real threats to security and stability in the world. Now, over the past few years, there have been several cases of demonstrations and popular movements that were peaceful at first, but that became violent, and which led to the loss of lives and damage to infrastructure, and even led to external and foreign interference and undermined the stability of the region. Some of these events have led to disastrous results, and the international community is still trying to draw lessons from these events. We hope that this will not happen in Iran or in any other state. The Islamic Republic of Iran is a neighbor of ours, We have long-standing historic relations with Iran, and we certainly are keen on maintaining friendly relations based on sovereignty, non-interference, and we have asserted this in the framework of the Gulf Council and also the various Islamic bodies, and we'd like to convey their concerns to you as well. The stability and security of Iran is linked to the stability and security of the region as a whole and of the world as a whole. And this means restraint. Demonstrators must show restraint so there are no more victims. I think, of course, steps must be taken to avoid escalation and violence. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Kuwait for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and welcome to the hot seat. And thank you to our briefer, Assistant Secretary General Zerahoon, for the updates on the situation in Iran, and a very warm welcome to all the new members of the Security Council. We look forward to working closely with all 6 of you to enhance international peace and security. The United Kingdom is watching events in Iran very closely. We regret the loss of life that has occurred during the protests. We call for an end to the violence and for the government of Iran to comply with its international human rights obligations in dealing with these protests. There needs to be a meaningful debate about the legitimate and important issues that the protesters are raising. I note here that President Rouhani has said that the protesters' concerns are legitimate and that they have a right to peaceful protest. People should be able to exercise their right to freedom of expression and demonstrate peacefully and lawfully. We encourage the Iranian authorities to permit this. No one is forcing Iran onto our agenda. The Security Council is perfectly empowered through Article 34 of the UN Charter, and I quote, to investigate any dispute or any situation which might lead to international friction or give rise to a dispute, in order to determine whether the continuance of the dispute or situation is likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security. The United Kingdom's concerns about the human rights situation in Iran extend beyond the recent treatment of protesters. The continued use of the death penalty, including for juveniles, weak rule of law, restrictions on freedom of expression and freedom of religion, belief, are all deeply worrying. We call on Iran to adhere to its international obligations, to respect the rights of individuals to freedom of expression, opinion, and peaceful assembly. We also urge Iran to permit full access to the Special Rapporteur so she can fully assess Iran's actions on air.